Welcome to our session on unpacking toxicity and emotional abuse in the workplace. The three of us are from independent sectors, NGen 2020 Fellows Alumni Group. Before we get started, we will briefly introduce ourselves. Hi again, I'm Dr. Christine Valareso. I identify as a cisgender, multicultural Latina, Peruana, a Peruvian, and I am also a highly sensitive person and an empath. I am an intuitive spiritual coach that helps people reestablish their foundation after trauma and reconnect to their true soul being. In another life, I was a political scientist, a human trafficking scholar, and an educator. So human rights are still a very integral part of my life. I just wanted to say how grateful I am to have you all be here and how happy I am to be here with you all. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend this time with us.
Hey y'all, I am Roque Diaz, but everyone calls me Rocky. I identify as a historically excluded and marginalized first generation Puerto Rican. I've spent the first 25 years performing as a professional musician and a music educator. In the past 10 years, I've shifted into a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner realm. I'm currently the Senior Director of DEI at McPhail Center for Music in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and literally weeks away from defending my doctoral dissertation. So I'm grateful to share this space with y'all today.
Thank you, Rocky. My name is Lillian Singh. I am a rural Mississippian, born in Mississippi. I was raised in South Central Los Angeles. I think that's an important part of who I am and how I show up professionally. I've been working at the intersection of racial economic justice for about 15 years or so. I am formerly the Vice President of Programs and Racial Wealth Equity at Prosperity Now, where I've built a career building the power and capacity of nonprofit leaders of color across the country. I am embarking on a new venture as an Aspen Institute Fellow to really capacitate and capitalize nonprofits. And in a couple of weeks, I'll be able to share even more news. If you're tracking me on LinkedIn or staying connected on the app on a new incredible job opportunity that was offered, really working on building power and resilience for communities of color in particular across the country. And I'm so excited to be in this space as an alum, NGen alum with my other fellows, and hoping that you all get as much out of this session together as we got into putting it together for you all.
Okay, next slide, please. So the goals for this workshop. Emotional abuse is subtle, often goes unnoticed, and can be easily hidden or dismissed. It transcends boundaries and physical locations and can occur anywhere, including remote and hybrid work environments. You may not even realize you're experiencing this, doubt yourself, or think you're losing touch with reality. This abuse has a tremendous negative effect on mental, emotional, psychological, and physical health of a person. And BIPOC and others with marginalized identities can be impacted. And to note that BIPOC can also perpetuate this. This session will examine what emotional abuse is, specifically workplace gaslighting, why it occurs, and the connection between how systemic oppression, emotional abuse, and powers are connected, the impact on the workplace and people, and what leaders can do about this in their organizations. By the end of the session, y'all will recognize how common this abuse is, the signs, how to respond to it, how to identify whether you or someone else is experiencing this, how to protect yourself, and steps to take if you're experiencing it, and how leaders can hold themselves and others accountable to contributing to equitable, affirming organizations, and how to help yourself with a workplace resource toolkit. You will leave the session learning how to protect yourself or colleagues and identifying toxicity and emotional abuse in the workplace. So let's dig in. Next slide.
Okay, so you guys will be with me for at least 10 minutes. So let's get started. We'll dive into what emotional abuse is. So according to the American Psychological Association, emotional abuse, did I say that right in the beginning? I feel like I said American abuse. It's emotional abuse, also known as psychological abuse. It's a pattern of behavior where one person deliberately and repeatedly subjects another to non-physical acts that are detrimental to behavioral and effective functioning and overall mental well-being. So something that's important to note with this particular abuse is that it's non-physical. So it largely appears invisible compared to domestic abuse or sexual abuse. And it makes it difficult to identify, particularly because it tends to occur over long periods of time. So that's what makes it more egregious, more insidious. There's no universally agreed upon definition, and it is not even listed in the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. But there are a few common threads that help to define what this type of abuse includes. And it encompasses verbal abuse, intimidation and terrorization, humiliation and degradation, exploitation, harassment, rejection and withholding of affection, especially when it comes to romantic partnerships, isolation and excessive control. So we will look at a particular form of emotional abuse called gaslighting. And gaslighting is when one person manipulates another into doubting their perceptions, their experiences, their understanding of events, essentially their entire reality. And a key component here is the loss of self-trust. So it's important to know that gaslighting can occur at the micro level between two people, whether it's a familial or friendship dynamic, a romantic relationship, or at the workplace with colleagues or leadership. At the same time, it can occur between two or more people as well in larger entities, including nonprofit organizations, foundations, corporations, churches, political parties, among many others. There are also many different types of gaslighting, and this one is particularly relevant for BIPOC folks, and this is called race lighting. It is the political, social, economic, and cultural process that perpetuates and normalizes a white supremacist reality through pathologizing those who resist. In other words, it's where people of color, they doubt their own thoughts, their own actions, their own beliefs, their own understanding of what happens through systemically delivered racialized messages. So it makes them second guess their lived experiences as it relates to racism in particular. In terms of prevalence, we don't have good statistics that look at the scope, the general scope of gaslighting and emotional abuse in the United States or even worldwide. But we do have stats that look at intimate partner violence, specifically gaslighting. For this workshop, focused more on the workplace, I did find two particular polls, one from 2017, a YouGov America poll that found that 75% of those surveyed had no idea what gaslighting was versus 19%. In a 2019 Twitter poll conducted by the UK-based firm MHR, they surveyed a little bit more than 3,000 people between the ages of 18 and 54, and they found that nearly 60% experienced gaslighting in their workplace versus 30% that did not, and 12 that did not know whether they had experienced this. So you can see there are very contradictory results here, very mixed information, and I feel like it strongly has to do with the incongruent definitions that emotional abuse and also gaslighting takes, not just here in the United States, but in other countries as well, and also the underreporting. If we don't know how to identify a form of abuse, we don't even know what we're reporting. Next slide, please. I have to enunciate that. So let's examine why this abuse happens. Oh, there's so many things here, but for a variety of reasons, this happens due to multifaceted and different experiences that you may undergo in your own life. And I always say, start with yourself. When you look at your own suitcase of life and you unpack your own life experiences, your own traumas, your own wounds, what I like to call your side of the street, you will be able to pinpoint certain events, certain experiences, and other propensities that may increase the likelihood of you experiencing this abuse. And it is super important to note that it doesn't mean you're at fault at all. It just makes you more likely from the perspective of the abuser. The underlying reason for this form of abuse, however, it's all about control and power, whether it's done subconsciously or unconsciously or overtly or covertly. So we will briefly look at 3 micro-level reasons why this can occur. Number one, if you've experienced adverse childhood experiences and the degree to which you've experienced these. So these include neglect, abuse, different forms of trauma, whether you witnessed or experienced violence growing up, divorce, whether you had a caregiver who had a mental health condition, whether you had a caregiver or family member that had some type of substance abuse disorder, etc. Those could predispose you to gaslighting and emotional abuse, broadly speaking. Second, we have intergenerational and ancestral trauma. This could be its own workshop. Essentially, we have patterns that are passed down from one generation to another, and many of these are subconscious. We don't know that we are repeating these patterns until we are aware and until we start our own healing journeys, whatever that means for each of us. Finally, I denote, and I think this is super important, self-love, self-worth, as it relates to the delineation of boundaries. And this is super important for any of us that have grown up in dysfunctional and abusive households. If you do not know what a boundary is, how to erect a healthy boundary, and even how to assert it, and to know your right as an adult that you can do so with any relationship in your life, especially in the workplace, this can make it very difficult to not being able to distinguish different forms of abuse that could potentially happen. So at the macro level, we have systemic oppression and power. And we only need to look at the most recent events with the murders of people of color in various communities here in the United States and around the world, microaggressions and racism against various other groups to denote that this oppression has continued for decades and even centuries. So gaslighting, it is an established interpersonal weapon that's very much rooted in power differentials, gender-based biases, patriarchal and misogynistic systems. So this particular abuse, it disproportionately affects women. And this is also important to note that men, as well as other genders, can also be victims, and that women, as well as other genders, can also be perpetrators. Gaslighting is also rooted very much in systemic oppressions and the different strata, especially the intersecting identities as they relate to race, ethnicity, age, social class, religion, gender, sex, disability. I'll even add language and many others, because these all help to feed and foster a climate that increases the vulnerability for people of color, especially in feeling powerless to call out, to name this abuse in a white dominant system. So the workplace, it's actually the perfect environment, unfortunately, for gaslighting, precisely due to the natural hierarchical structures that exist and the power struggles that can occur between employees and employees, employees and leadership, and then you have leadership and leadership, as they also have a vertical structure as well. And this disproportionately affects BIPOC and other marginalized people. This imbalance of power, which is inherent in the workplace itself, but also when you start looking at other intersectionalities and identities like race, these also help increase the likelihood of this type of abuse, just because of the implicit power dynamics that exist. I'll also note too, that many times these abusers are connected to higher forms of power, whether that's within their organization, across organizations, within their community, or even broader if it's global, depending on the work being done. And so this makes going up the chain of command, especially to human resources, to the board of directors and whomever else may be an entity in that organization, very challenging and not advisable, because gaslighters tend to align themselves with the, I'll just quote, right people. And part of the reason they do this is because then they'll get away with what they do. They tend to build strong relationships with people within the organization, but also within the community. And so they're deeply trusted, they're well respected, they're seen as an expert in whatever it is that they do. And so this makes it easy for them to get rid of potential victims, but it also means that there is a high degree of complicity in the organization and maybe in that particular community, because they enable this type of behavior and this abuse for whatever reasons, whether it's money, whether it has to do with favors or with fear. Next slide, please. So now we'll take a look at the impact of abuse on people. Emotional abuse, specifically gaslighting, can affect anyone. Anyone's susceptible, but I will say that for those that have a strong sense of self, that have a strong sense of self-love, self-worth, and can also delineate what a healthy boundary is, they are least likely to be gaslighted because they will call out that shit, for lack of a better term, right away. But populations that are disproportionately affected include women, again, due to the patriarchal and misogynistic inequalities that have existed for centuries, not just in terms of race, gender, sex, but also income. Those from historically excluded and marginalized backgrounds, Black, Indigenous people of color, LGBTQIA, immigrants, refugees, neurodivergent people, including those that have ADHD, those that are autistic, those that have dyspraxia or dyslexia, or even Tourette syndrome, those that live with anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions, those that identify as a highly sensitive person or an empath, and finally, those that may have grown up in a dysfunctional or abusive household. In terms of the workplace, this is pretty straightforward. Whenever there is any type of abuse, any type of toxicity, it's going to adversely affect the workplace, and people feel it. You may not see it, but you will feel it energetically. First, the culture. There's an overall diminished, demoralized, non-cohesive, unsafe work environment, especially when you can see this and feel it and you know what's going on. You just feel like you cannot trust what's going on. And this goes into the second tenet of trust. There's an overall disengagement and an erosion of trust. When something is going on and you know it can be abusive, it makes it difficult to not only trust others, but also leadership, because this is something that is usually, that shouldn't continue or that shouldn't occur in the workplace. Third, in terms of time and money, you have wasted organizational time and money and greater inefficiencies, not just in terms of revenues, but also with employees and recruiting and onboarding new employees if others resign or are fired due to this type of abuse. And this connects to productivity as well. If you are experiencing emotional abuse, gaslighting, or any type of abuse, you may see an increase in taking your own sick time, your PTO, or general leave. And so that also has an effect on the workplace, but also for the organization itself, because they'll have to wait until you come back unless someone else can replace what you're doing. So the impact, and this should not be underemphasized, that's the right word. The impact of gaslighting spreads beyond the people involved. Once there's a crack on the team, everyone feels it. Next slide, please. Mini tea break. Okay. There are general signs and also specific workplace indicators that let you know that you may be experiencing this form of abuse. And I will just say again, tying into the definition that we went over earlier, gaslighting is very difficult to identify precisely because it tends to happen over time if you don't catch it right away. And in retrospect, you start to see those, what you thought are independent events, or someone being a jerk, or someone just saying a one-off comment. They tend to all be part of the same stream of abuse. And that's what makes it extremely insidious on all aspects of your being. But some of these signs, which are absolutely not limited to the ones I'm going to discuss because there are a lot, include one, your body and your intuition just knows it. You will feel it. In any of your energetic centers in your body, largely speaking, you will feel something is off, something is wrong, that whomever is treating you in a negative way, whoever is being abusive, you're just going to feel it. And that ties into your intuition, that gut feeling, that gut instinct. Something that it's like a small whisper in you, where you know that what you're experiencing is true and it's your reality. And I'd like to say too, a lot of times the somatic signals that our own body gives off, it usually happens first before it can connect to our mind. So always trust yourself. I can't emphasize this enough. Trust yourself if you feel like something is going on. Other general indicators include self-doubt, confusion, a loss of trust in self and others, isolation and withdrawal, a decline in mental health, and overall and complete exhaustion. In terms of specific workplace indicators, again, what I'm going to tell you, it's not even limited to this list. There are many more as well. And if you have any, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will get them about 15 seconds later. These include people taking credit for stealing, plagiarizing your work, people spreading lies or making up stories about you, people blaming you, people denying things you know to be true, people throwing you under the bus, people questioning your recollection of events, especially in meetings and especially when you have proof. People who accuse you of doing the very things that they are doing to you. So it's a form of mirroring projection. Harassment, intimidation, threats, especially via lawsuits that are designed to make you stay quiet about the abuse. Receiving undeserved negative or performance reviews. People calling you names, using disrespectful language, yelling at you, demeaning your person, your capabilities, your work, or your performance. And on your end, you may actually question yourself a lot, question your work, your performance, despite your past record. You may feel like whatever you do, it is not enough. And you may also feel like you're walking on eggshells, always on guard, even if you have no history of anxiety or depression. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Christine. Well, we wanted to share a bit of our lived experiences and navigating through toxicity and emotional abuse in the workplace. Even though these are our examples, these case studies may extend across different sectors such as education, the arts, corporate enterprise, government, healthcare, nonprofit, and others, in developing this awareness. So starting with the historically excluded and marginalized student experience. I'm going to share with y'all a lived experience of mine. As I mentioned previously, I am ending my 5-year PhD journey in a few weeks, and it's not been an easy one. What I thought was going to be a beautiful journey, enrolling into a doctoral program, being awarded a full diversity fellowship, turned into a gas and race lightning destruction and reconstruction of who I am. The university professor who recruited me with what I thought were good intentions, unfortunately turned out to be a form of white saviorism and supremacy. As a historically excluded and marginalized person of color, I came into a PhD program with many deficiencies in the realm of academia. Yet I kept my head down and I worked very hard. As I continued to develop my DEI interests, the more the professor started praising our accolades and casually reminding me that even though I was accepted, no one else at the institution really wanted me in the first place. So these first few years, I just took it. I took the gas and the race lighting. Why? Because I didn't really know how to amplify my voice. But it really wasn't until the pandemic and living in an epicenter here in Minneapolis with, unfortunately, with George Floyd being murdered, that I truly opened my eyes to my lived experiences. While these events were happening, I was writing my dissertation with little to no support. I just assumed this is how it's done in academia, sort of like an academic hazing. Well, once I realized that my white colleagues were getting support, completing their advanced degrees in a timely manner, I decided to ask the professor to support me more. And I guess I said the wrong word, support. After that, I received a number of demeaning and dismissive emails, targeted social media posts, and more just degrading communication. The advice I got from my department was to keep my head down and finish. You were so close. So I took it. I shouldn't have. This form of support is what I refer to as white silence. Basically, I hear you, I support you, Rocky, but you still got to play this game and finish without no one really truly supporting you and helping you. So I did this, kept my head down. Then a few months went by and boom, another lot of communication, stalking on social media. So I was triggered again. I mean, all day, like sick, body shakes, you know, what Christina was talking about in your gut, you name it. But I finally mustered up the courage and reported all of these events to the Office of Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action, explaining that this conduct was based on my race. And what I experienced in the communication was this person taking credit for being a white savior who had basically created me. I expressed significant concern that this person would prevent me from attaining my PhD, using their affiliation with the institutions that I'm working with to basically pull all my research data. I also reported that feeling no support from the department and from the university. So this traumatic experience really did give me the perseverance to understand, you know, who I am truly. So I say this, and I have outlined some tips here. My first tip really in engaging this and understanding it is self-care. Just gotta start with yourself first. So I did that first with this example. And yes, I saved my correspondence because you never know. But really it's that self-care. Second tip was resources. You know, the Office of Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action, you know, talk with your HR services because you have this in your organization. Just be mindful that it does take a lot of emotional labor on yourself, but you know, this is a resource. My third tip is to amplify your voice. So many organizations that we reside in are derived from this colonization mindset. So be mindful. And again, my last tip goes back to self-care. It's all about the self-care. You know, this work and decentering and dismantling toxic and abusive voices is exhausting. So please take care of yourself. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Roque. I appreciate it. Okay, so I'm back and I will talk about the employee experience. I actually worked in a non-leadership position in a very brief stint in a nonprofit world right before the pandemic started. And again, it was a remote nonprofit job from the beginning. We never, the job wasn't physical or face-to-face for the most part, except I'll get to that. So from the beginning, I noticed a lot of red flags with communication, actually from the interview, but I dismissed them and I said, oh, you know, miscommunication issues. That's what I thought. But in retrospect, they were all precursors to what would later be verbal, emotional abuse and gaslighting. And about 4 months into my job, we had to attend in-person trainings because we attended a specific population on a specific subject matter for 1 week, 8 hours a day, not including after training events. And that was my first experience meeting this person, my boss, and experiencing gaslighting and emotional abuse. And so this happened in subsequent meetings. We had four more trainings in person, and this was around different areas that we had to travel to. At team meetings, I experienced this one-on-one communications, whether they were verbal or written. And again, the person that was gaslighting me and that was abusive was my boss. And this person was also a person of color and a woman, among many other identities. And I'll say many gaslighters like to do this, like to be abusive in a covert way so that others don't see it. But in my experience, it was covert and overt. This person had no qualms about doing what they did in front of other people. And people in my organization noticed. It was extremely small. We're talking less than 7 people. And also the trainees at these events noticed because they would come up to me and ask me if I was okay and what was wrong. Flash forward 8 months into the job, and I was served with a performance improvement plan, a PIP. It's my first time learning what it was too. I had no idea. And I was threatened to be fired for not performing. And I was so confused. And I was like, what's going on? Because first, why does it take 8 months for someone to tell you that you're not performing? And second, I had no idea. I never saw it coming. I experienced immense self-doubt. I was experiencing paranoia, actually. I didn't trust anyone in my organization. I didn't trust even myself. I was very isolated from my team during this PIP process. I was barred from all meetings except the weekly meeting where I had to attend, even though it was humiliating. Everyone knew what was going on, and I was just there trying to diminish myself. And I was barred from engaging in any of the projects that I managed. So by the time I realized what was happening to me, I was just completely unraveled. My self-esteem, my well-being, everything was just completely shot for me. And from the beginning, when the first training occurred in June until I resigned in November, on November 18th, 2020, I experienced major insomnia. I was sleeping less than 4 hours a day, massive anxiety, daily crying. I was crying a lot. I was experiencing daily panic attacks, which was never the norm for me. I was confused a lot, and I had a very low level and very poor concentration. It was very difficult to do anything, even in my personal life, like cook, clean, take care of my dogs or my team. And in the last several weeks of this situation, I just stopped eating. And my mental health overall, it deteriorated extremely rapidly. And towards the end, the last 2 weeks, I didn't even want to wake up. For me, in my experience, there was no other recourse. I worked for a startup. There was no formal HR. It was a third party, and they did not provide support, especially legal counsel, to employees. The board of directors were also not a viable outlet for me because they were handpicked by the CEO, by the boss, and they were friends, some of them BFFs. So there was major complicity at that level, and I had no idea what to do. Honestly, I was thinking, is there some type of ombudsman, some type of supranational NGO accountability group, like anything that I could turn to? I even thought about the police at one point. That wasn't a viable option, obviously, and legal counsel, it was not going to go well for me if I pursued legal action. On top of that, my boss was an attorney, and so she liked to intimidate people. I was very scared, very alone. And so I kept my mouth shut. And there are different forms of trauma responses we face during these times if we experience abuse, traumas, and fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And I just went into a placating type of situation. I did everything I could to please this person, to diminish myself, to kind of make myself not exist. But my breaking point came in November of 2020. And I realized when I did not want to get up, like I just wanted to sleep and not wake up ever, that I needed to quit. And I had no backup plan. So that was scary too, on top of that. But I quit. And my boss even gaslighted me the very last time I submitted my resignation letter, even though it clearly states why I quit. She's like, you quit for this reason. I'm like, okay. I can offer 3 tips to you. If you are in a similar position, regardless of your position, leadership or employee, or if you are not able to leave your job, because I know it's difficult for a variety of reasons. First, document the hell out of your experience from the very first incident to the most recent, and act like your own investigator. Use your own device. Do not use any company property. Even if you work in a remote job, everything is tracked. Document the who, what, when, where. Communications, or take pictures with your phone. Reference them, record anything. If you have to be in a space, whether that's virtually or in person with the perpetrator, record, get eyewitnesses, or have someone be with you. Second, like Roque said, self-care. It is paramount, absolutely paramount with this type of abuse. Gaslighting just takes a complete, I would say, negative manifestation of your overall mind, body, and soul. It affects everything. They're intrinsically linked, your mind and your body. And it's important that you engage in some type of mind-body practice, mind-body-soul practice, however you define that, because this helps calm your parasympathetic nervous system so that you are not always on a flight or fright kind of mode. Finally, stay connected. Find at least one human being, and furry critters too, if you have any, someone that can validate your experience, your truth, your reality, because you are not living in a twilight zone. What you're experiencing is valid, it's true. And it's so easy to second guess yourself. And try to preferably find someone outside the organization. Yes, and so I'll pass on to Lillian. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. I want to thank my peers, Rocky, for giving us the student experience, Christine, the employee experience. And I wanted to share an experience as an executive leadership team member, because I want to name that I think it happens at every level. And frankly, before engaging in this process with Christine and Rocky, I didn't even have a word to actually name what I experienced myself. So I'm grateful to be a part of this with you all. So we were engaging, my experience starts with, we were engaging in one of many very, very healthy debates where 50% of the team had a perspective and 50% of the team had a different perspective. And I actually pride myself on being what I call a slow but intentional processor. So when I do actually have something to say, and when I open my mouth to speak, I'm intentional about making sure that it's impactful. So I'm typically the last person to kind of like engage in a conversation. So being the last person to engage in this very lightful and energizing conversation, I was clear and very targeted with my words. I was happy that I had been given the opportunity to kind of listen to everyone else's perspective and to really consider the pros and the cons of everything that was being said. And immediately what happened to me upon my sharing, the last person to speak, everyone has said their piece in this healthy debate, is after I spoke, I was asked publicly, why are you so frustrated? It took me a moment to reflect. I was like, wait, did I just experience that in front of my entire leadership team? Did I say something that the words that I used, even though I was very intentional, I was contemplating almost every single word, almost taking notes, right? Sometimes when you're in a meeting, you're taking notes so that you can actually formulate all of your thoughts. Was I waving my hands in the air? Like, did my voice elevate? Did I frown? Did I sound angry? Why are you so frustrated is what I heard. None of those things were true, right? Like, I wasn't expressing frustration, but this is what I received. And again, before this session and putting this together with my peers, I didn't even know that I was gaslit, like publicly. So, but what I did is I took a moment to actually just collect myself because I wanted to maintain my cool, because my passion about an issue should never be miscommunicated or misunderstood as frustration. So instead of me actually responding with frustration, I actually collected myself. And that's the tip number one that I want to give to you all. When you're caught off guard, the abuser is likely wanting you to actually respond with the level of anger or irrational emotion. But if you can collect yourself and realize that what you're experiencing, you maintain a level of power. So I openly engage the accuser in conversation. And I asked, can you please help me understand why you arrived at the conclusion that I was frustrated? So that gave me wisdom in that moment and power, because then I asked that person to then elaborate, because I wanted everyone to understand that what I was experiencing was an attack. And hopefully what they heard wasn't frustration, but it was actually just my passion around what we were talking about. So that's tip number two. If you are in an executive role and you have an opportunity to effectively engage, don't actually engage with anger, but invite that person to a very effective conversation in front of everyone. And then tip number three is how I responded in this moment, is that I respectfully disagreed with the analysis, that I was frustrated. And then I invited this person to have a follow-up offline conversation with me, because I wanted to be clear that when I am actually speaking, my frustration perceived can actually just be passion. And I didn't want to be labeled as the frustrated executive. Two things I want to name here is I am clear, right, that the power differential in a role as an executive is very different than what Christine was defining and describing. So that was one of the two things, that was one thing that I had on my side in that moment. And then the other piece was, I knew that I had the power to further the conversation in an offline conversation. And if I hadn't done that, I think I would have actually left my power in that conversation of me being labeled as the frustrated executive. So I did intentionally follow up, and I did intentionally document that experience because it was important to me so that everyone understood that when I was expressive, that it wasn't just frustration. It was me actually being very thoughtful and contemplative about what we were engaging in, because I did not want to be labeled as the frustrated executive. So that's my experience, and I hope that was helpful. Now we're going to move into learning a little bit more about who's in the room with us today. Thank you so much for choosing this session. The conference has been on fire for all of today, so I am excited that you chose to join us. So as we move into our next session here, it's going to be a couple of poll questions that we ask you to just respond to. Your answers are anonymous. We're not tracking who's responding. We're not using that information later, but it is going to be important for us as we move into the next part of our workshop together is our self-reflection session. So if we can put the poll up, that would be awesome. So I know our tech guy, Brandon, somebody's in the background. They're going to go ahead and launch our physical poll. The poll is up. Awesome. Thank you so much. Y'all, we on this other side of the screen. We do not see what y'all see. So, I'm going to name that. So thank you for the tech folks over at Uswell. Y'all are working hard. This has been an incredible conference. I am grateful to be in community with all of you. So the first question, if the poll is up, the first question is, I am a BIPOC leader, yes or no? If our tech people can give me the response to that, that would be awesome. If everyone has had an opportunity to answer that question. Thank you. So just about 2/3 of the folks in our session today identify as BIPOC leaders. Great. Question number 2, I am a part of. This question is really helping us to understand, how are you showing up today? Are you in upper management? Are you in middle management? Are you in lower management? Because as we've described, from being a student to an employee to an executive, we all experience toxicity in the workplace because of power in a very different way. Okay, so the majority of us, we have 9.1% in upper management. We have 63%, again, nearly 2/3 in middle management, identifying as the directors of teams. And then we have about 1/3 identifying, okay. Awesome, awesome. We have moved on to the next question. Thank you, Brandon. Our IT folks is working it out for us. So we have about 35% of our participants who actually supervise BIPOC leaders, and 64% of us are not supervising. Thank you so much for that as well. That helps us understand who's in the room. Great. And the question, the primary reason I chose to attend this workshop, D, to discuss how leaders can hold themselves and others accountable to contributing to equitable affirming organizations at nearly 50%. So hopefully you all have gotten some of that. So, and in our last question, I have spent some time researching the topic of toxicity in the workplace. Great. We have 42% with a yes and 57%. So you're part of that. You're part of my crew. Was like, what is this? How do I name it? How do I describe it? How do I engage it? How do I avoid it? So Thank you so much for being open and honest with your respective answers. I'm going to kick the floor back over to my partner in crime, Rocky, who's going to take us through a self-reflective process. So, Rocky?
Okay, thank you, Lillian. And can we get the next slide, please? Great. So we've given you all a lot to unpack. So we're going to use this time to really self-reflect and open up on a Jamboard that Brandon's going to throw into the chat thread for y'all to open up to provide some responses. And you can use the sticky note feature that's located on the tool panel. Responding to this question of, I will commit to minimizing abuse, gaslighting, and workplace toxicity by, and let's see, I'm gonna go on to Google Doc to see, and I know there's a 15-minute delay here. And remember that these responses are still anonymous. Let's see, once you get that, come on in there. And just know that we'll keep this open for a little bit after the session too, if y'all want to keep on giving us responses. That'd be fantastic. Jamboard is up, excellent. Oh, see a bunch of little anonymous things in there, cool. Oh, this is so fancy. And take your time, no worries, we got some time here.
And the way that, and Rocky, if I can help you,
Sure.
the way that you add to the Jamboard as we're all entering the space together, over to your left, the fourth little sticky note down, it says sticky note. You just literally click on that sticky note, and then you're able to actually just type directly into that sticky note. And then you just press save, and you're all good to go. So you navigate all the way over to your left, and you go 1, 2, 3, 4 things down. There we go. We got our jam.
Oh,
Ready. We're doing it.
So we got self-care, we got listening, practice open lines of communication to address issues in the moment. Another listening, being open and honest, great. Let's see, acknowledging the humanity and our coworkers. We all have different lives with different sets of responsibilities and circumstances. Let's be graceful with each other, okay? Co-creating an equitable, safe, or brave space for discussion and accountability in the workplace with some of my most trusted colleagues, okay? Calling it out when I see it, providing a safe space for colleagues to speak yes. These are good, these are strong. Okay, well, let's move on a little bit here. Y'all can keep on putting responses here, and then I'm gonna get into some, on the next slide here, please, on unpacking what this really means moving forward. Thank you. So, what should leaders and informal leaders do about this? Listen. Just listen first. It's the first priority. You know, you want to make sure that the other person's feeling heard. As difficult as it may be to receive this criticism, you know, they are taking a risk by putting themselves on the line. So being open-minded, empathetic, and show grace. Learning to sincerely apologize. You know, we see this in cancel culture now. You know, someone gets called out, and will they take accountability and apologize? Missteps will occur, but it's better to take actions, fail, and try again repeatedly than to be so scared of failure that you resort to doing things or not doing things that only create and maintain a performative illusion of providing support. And what should employees, potential students, you know, do about this? Knowing what your rights and responsibilities are as a leader, an informal leader, employee, student can be complicated. You know, so yes, we're workers, we're students, So we can fill these roles as both the supervisor and the supervised. This means we can experience harmful behavior from other professors, advisors, program directors, senior leaders, staff, and others. We can be responsible for reporting on behalf of someone else, and we could be responsible for the harmful behavior. Organizations generally don't provide a lot of clarity about what these roles are in reporting this behavior until after the harmful behavior has already happened, which leaves us unprepared to interrupt it and to protect ourselves or our fellow colleagues. When an inappropriate and abusive behavior shows up in our workplace, it is often incredibly difficult to know what we can do or should do, so we freeze. So practicing how to react in the moment and how to respond is a great way to feel prepared to intervene by a bystander in a moment or to formally report if something happens. These are just a few examples of resources to use in addressing toxicity and emotional abuse in the workplace. And Lillian's now going to share a toolkit and deepening this conversation. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Rafi. So in a moment here, you all are going to receive in the chat a Google document. And in this Google document, it is open because while we are open and excited to be in the community with you all, many of you have a lot of experiences as well as information that I think could really benefit others who joined this session today. So our desire in this moment is to actually share this as an open tool, as an open resource for the period of about a week or so that you can go in and add in additional resources. So this can be a living, breathing document that you can then share with others who you know are walking in this journey of unpacking toxicity in their own personal work environments, but also needing support. So this has been outlined in a way that actually just aligns with the presentation that we were so grateful to be able to put together for you today, is what are the exploring some of the common issues and signs is the first section here. Engaging how to identify whether you or someone else is experiencing this is the second section. Exploring strategies and ways to actually protect yourself is the third section here. So what we would like for you all to be able to do is one, lean into these resources for yourself, but also know that this is a shared document. So if you can keep this link for a moment in time, and after about 7 days or so, I'll just convert it to read only. So for the moment, it is a shared document. We invite you all to add your expertise, to add your resources, to add other links in the format that you see here. So that we can take this away out of this session and we can use it in the future. Now I'm going to pass the floor back over to Christine, and I believe that we have space right now for a few questions.
Hey everyone, I know I'm not going to be the only one answering Q&A, but I just wanted to add, thank you all, before we get into Q&A, thank you all so much for, again, just taking the time, the energy, the space out of your day to be here with us. I hope, it is our hope, I should say, that you learned something, that you were able to know that what you are experiencing, and I hope no one is experiencing this, but if you are, that I hope that you continue to trust yourself and that you believe in yourself and keep following your intuition because it's spot on. And so we'd like to take this remaining time to answer any questions you have. If you have any, please feel free to drop them in your, I guess, chat area on your end, and we'll get them about 15 seconds later, thanks to Brandon. So I guess we can, let's see, I know there's been a bunch of questions that have been fielded in here. Thank you all for the support. I'm reading these comments right now. So excited for this important conversation. Hey all, can't wait to hear more about this important topic. Greatly appreciate the defining of abuses. Oh, yes, Rob, thank you so much. Yeah, I agree. I think it's important to delineate those. I think it'll help going forward, especially if you're experiencing this, to really know that, yeah, this is probably happening, and it's not just a one-off comment. It's not just someone being a jerk. And when you look at it collectively, it all adds up.
We have one question, Christine, from Julie up top. I noticed that bias, explicit or implicit, doesn't show up in micro. Curious panelists' take on that.
Yeah, there were actually so many factors I wanted to include that could be a different workshop on its own. But you are absolutely correct, and I appreciate you offering this, Julie. Bias is important to consider because it's our own preconceived notions, whether they are done overtly or consciously or subconsciously in the way that we relate to people, and especially as people of color and with people of color and other marginalized groups within a white dominant system. So it is important because we grow up with these biases that are largely framed in our own homes growing up. And that shapes a lot of how you see the outside world, how you see other people and your dynamics and how you work with them. And I'll just give an example briefly, and I'll pass it on to my colleagues too, if they'd like to answer. I grew up in a dysfunctional home, and I'm an adult child of alcoholics. And so I never really learned how to set boundaries. I had no idea what that was. And so I had an immediate bias on, I always thought, no, you shouldn't let anyone get mad. Not even raising your voice, but confronting someone or talking to someone about conflict, I thought that was not allowed. And so for me, I think that was something that was a huge learning experience in my particular case. And that was something that I realized that I am implicitly carried on from my own family, but also a lot of ancestral trauma on my end. I'll pass it on to Lillian or Rocky if you guys would like to contribute anything.
Okay, Rocky.
I mean, you did such a good job there, Christine. Really, for me, it's when I think about implicit bias, it's the understanding the commonalities. We as a society, we tend to always want to focus on the commonalities, but it's the differences as well, and understanding the perspectives and being able to reach out and take that awareness and that journey of understanding that, there are probably times to disagree, and to live in that discomfort is to really, what is it that, why are you feeling this discomfort? Instead of to like pack it away, to start engaging in that, and like, why is that? Why am I doing this? What is this rooted in me? Is this rooted in my background? And living in America, we know that we're in this very white dominant system that just perpetuates, and you get stuck in the cycle. And for people that are from marginalized backgrounds, we have this, we tend to go into this assimilation mindset. Like, this is what we're due to make by, but not anymore. We are the global majority, and we need to understand that yes, there are commonalities and there are differences, and how to make that step moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just name, I think it's also life experiences and what culture tells you. Like even in my example, the workplace has always said, the angry Black woman. So even showing up and I am actually being attacked, I'm so sensitive to not like contributing to that narrative because of, popular opinion or commentary around what that means, that I think that I even like kind of gut check whether or not how I'm showing up, am I fulfilling that prophecy or not? And it forces me to almost sometimes question my own power and my own strength. So I think it's, the last thing I'll add, I think we got 1 minute, they're going to cut us off, is to, make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who you can have open conversations with, and you can check whether or not it's implicit or explicit, right? Like, because the people who love you are going to be like, yeah, this is how you're showing up, versus this is actually what's happening to you. So that's the only thing that I would add there. And I'm just so grateful for NGen Fellows. I know they're out in the audience for joining us and rooting us on today, regardless of what cohort you're in. But the best one was last year because that was the one we were in. Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you so much, Rocky, for being in community with us today.
Thank you so much, everyone. Oh, and I wanted to add, yes, I have time. If you want to contact any of us, you have further questions or anything, feel free to click on our files and you can connect with us that way.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.